Hi everyone, my name is Adelaide Davis, founder of mediateacademy.com, home of the passionate mediator. This is the place where mediators, aspiring, new and accomplished, come and learn from experienced mediators, practitioners and thought leaders from around the world. The people we interview are incredibly generous with their time. They share their knowledge and experience with you so that you can learn, grow and improve your effectiveness and hopefully be inspired by what you've learned. Go out into the world, build your own success story, make a difference. Maybe then you'll come back onto Mediator Academy and tell your story with my audience. All right, handling challenging emotions is one thing in a mediation. What about when one of the parties in the mediation has and is experiencing deep emotional trauma as a result of the actions of the other party? I want to understand more about how, as mediators, we can ensure we're at the top of our game when mediating in a highly charged emotional context, so that we provide the best environment, context for the parties to be able to talk about what they need to talk about the things that matter most. My guest today is based in Adelaide, South Australia, and travels regularly within Australia and internationally to advise on conflict management options and mediate a broad range of disputes. He's an independent mediation practitioner and arbitrator and specialises in dispute systems design, project alliancing, mediation training, mediation supervision, and the professional development of mediators. He also specialises in designing the process architecture of relationship contracts. His papers are incredibly thought-provoking and stimulating, and he's been involved in what I would describe as some of the most challenging contexts one could imagine ever mediating. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Greg Rooney onto Mediator Academy. Greg, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. Lovely to be here.
Greg, before we get into talking about the techniques and processes for mediating in highly charged emotional context, I want to burrow into a bit more about the approach, the mindset of the mediator. Now, you describe it as shifting the focus away from mediating the problem and focusing on mediating in the moment. Say what you mean by that, Greg.
Well, I think we often get a bit spooked by the problem when it's presented to us. You know, of course, we're mediators, parties come to us and hopefully we can resolve it. So the problem can become very big in our minds and divert us actually from what I think is the real issue, is building a relationship between each party, both separately and then bringing them together as a sort of bringing them together in a three-way relationship if it's a two-party mediation. So my sense is that from my experience and just doing this over a number of years, I've realised that what I'm actually doing is I'm building relationships all the time. And so I tend to not focus too much on the problem itself because I find it quite distracting, and it sometimes gets me away from just being present with people. And oftentimes just being present, you can pick up so much, and oftentimes little clues that can actually end up being the pathway to get to the resolution that you would not otherwise have seen if you were sort of mind in other places.
Okay, so when you describe being sort of distracted by the problem, that's almost the substantive elements of the dispute or the conflict. When you start getting into the detail, the clauses in the contract, who said what, when, to whom. When you start getting into that stuff, it can get in the way of being really present, so you can see what's going on in the room.
That's right. If you look at it this way, when we're presented with a case, we're often given a lot of information, and if it's a legal case, you'll get pleadings. And in a sense, if you read it all, you kind of understand all that is known. And what I'm trying to be interested in is what I don't know. And so in a sense, I listen and I put it in my mind get an understanding of what seems to be the case on both sides, but then I empty that mind. And now I know it can come back. It's stored in the back there somewhere, and if I need to pull it in, I can. But what I'm interested in is what I don't know.
Right.
And as a lawyer, we're often trained, and I'm a retired lawyer, I've practiced for many years, we often as lawyers ask questions where we know what the answer is or try to get the answer. As a mediator, what I'm trying to find out is not what I know, but what I don't know. So in a sense, the only way to find what you don't know is to actually relate to the person and allow them to come out and get away from their problem as they see it. So in a way, I'm trying to guide them away from the problem. It's not only me focusing on the problem, I'm trying to draw them away from it, to actually just speak to me on a one-to-one basis. And in that conversation, often things come out that they didn't even realise were relevant, and it opens my mind to things that I couldn't have picked would be relevant.
Okay, so I love the description of, being absorbing the information, and then you said something like, and then emptying the mind.
Yes.
How do you empty your mind?
Well, I think the answer lies in not making things too complex. In other words, I think we tend to, when we meet difficult situations, we tend to try and parallel that complexity. And if I become more complex and understand more and more, maybe that's the way through. But in fact, I think that starts to cloud our mind with so much information. So it's exactly the opposite. Go lighter, go lighter. And I think one of the things that I say to myself is that I've seen worse cases than this that have solved. This is not difficult. Worse things happen at sea. You think you've got a problem. You really don't have a problem here. So I'm talking myself into a situation that this is not a very complex situation. It's very uncomplex. And once I start getting my mind set, I think there's some sort of, when we have a rapport, I almost drawing the other party through sort of some sort of hypnosis into relaxing and saying, okay, worse things happen at sea, So in a sense, I think that's part of what I think in the paper I talk about mediators being irritants. And when I say an irritant, I mean probably the classic definition of irritating a muscle into life. So in other words, it creates an energy for change. And I think the irritation that I believe that what I try to do is the irritation of saying, well, I'm sorry, sir, this is not as bad as you think it is. Now that can irritate a lot of people who believe that their problem is the whole centre of the universe, So in a sense, what I'm trying to do, very delicately, in my own mind first, is to just calm things down and say, okay, yes, that's okay. And when you calm them down, oftentimes they become a bit clearer, and they will then reveal things through that relationship that, as I said, will be something we didn't know, and they didn't.
Okay, so in order to be effective, in order to help the other party, we need to first help ourselves. So we need to simplify things in our own mind, to reduce any, or get rid of any anxiety or preoccupation we might have about how complex this particular case is, how challenging it might be. Because if that's what we're feeling, that's going to come across in some way with the other party, and we might unwittingly raise their anxiety levels. But if we're really relaxed and calm and hey, I've seen worse, this isn't as complicated as you think, everything's going to be okay. If you can kind of give them that sort of reassurance and, as you said, calm them down, then they're in a better place to begin the conversation with you.
That's right. I think that's the starting point. And I think part of it, we have to work on ourselves first. Because oftentimes, if you think the party is in front of the mediator, and they employ me and you and all mediators because we're professionals, and they think, well, they obviously know things, they're experienced mediators, so they do watch you very closely. And I think if they see you feeling confident, even when everything in front of you tells you it's a disaster, if they feel confident, they're more likely to say, okay, this person's a professional, I'll trust, and they'll come with you. And I think people are very generous that way. It has been said to me by some lawyers who are mediators that when they when they're acting for parties in a mediation, oftentimes they find the mediator ends the matter too early. The mediator gives up first, and they as experienced mediators, know that this matter has still got a way to go. So I think, in a sense, we're the beacons through which the parties come. And so if our mindset is, look, I've seen worse, you can sort this out. By 5 o'clock today, you can walk out with a deal. I don't know what it is, but if you're happy to work with me, let's see what we can get on the table. At the end of the day, have a look at it, So in other words, I think we're agents for the future. And the future is 5 o'clock today. There'll be something there for you to seriously look at. You've got legal advice here, excellent lawyers. You ask them, what's on that table? Is that worth me taking or not? So are you prepared to work with me over the next 5 or 6 hours or whatever? Yeah. So in a sense, I think we have to be real in ourselves, feeling that way, to be able to impart that. So my view is that at the beginning of the paper that you referred to is how mediators think matters, and it's our thinking process that drives our practice. And so if we get our thinking right, then it's like a golf swing. When you got it right, it just sort of flows.
There's a quote. It's from Thomas Ogden. It's in your paper. Wonderful paper, by the way. And if you're watching the interview, go to Greg's website. You can read all his papers there. Very, very stimulating. I love the quote. It says, it's referring to psychoanalytic psychotherapy. It talks about we are continually in the process of learning to overcome what we have learned. I think I understand what that means, Greg. Help me clarify that in the context of mediation.
Well, I think what he's virtually saying is we have to be fresh. We have to create the law. So if I'm a lawyer, I study law, but every client I meet, I have to create the law fresh, each moment of the day. Social scientists are the same, and I believe us mediators are the same. So in a sense, we do need to read the case notes, we need to look at the pleadings and so on, but we have to draw on our experience of years of mediation to be totally present for these particular parties and this particular day. So we really, in a sense, have to overcome all that we've learnt to be present. Now, it doesn't mean we forget it, but what we do is we park it in a very backward area there, and we allow the new to come in. What I think we tend to do is, because our desire to solve the problem, we tend to sort of call on all our knowledge and our reading of the pleadings to try and hunt that problem out. So what we're actually doing is working on what we already know. And of course, what we already know is one party says black and one party says white. And of course, we immediately hit a snag there. So, but I think if we look at it from the fact of what we don't know, then really we have to clear the space, clear the decks. And it's like feng shui. They say feng shui, what you've got to do to bring new things in is clean the clutter out of your house. It's the same principle. You clean the clutter out of your head and you remain fresh. And so I think that's what he's saying, and I think that resonates with how I'm seeing it.
Yeah. So once we clear our mind, you then talked about the task of building relationships. So you talked about a kind of a three-way relationship, but first of all, establishing a relationship with each party separately, and then building a relationship together, focusing on the relational elements of the negotiation or of the conversation. Did I get that right, or did I misunderstand that?
That's correct. Look, when I look at it from this perspective, when I first started, I learnt my basic mediation course. There was a lot of work on private sessions and confidentiality in private sessions. Very little work on intake. There was mention that you do an intake and you get the dates and you sign your confidentiality agreement. After 22 years of practice, I do less and less private sessions and more intakes, preparation. And it's the preparation, like I say about lawyers, 95% of being a good lawyer is preparation, 5% is brilliance. I think the same thing as a mediator. And the preparation, I mean, is not reading out the files and trying to study the things. The actual preparation is just meeting people and talking to them. And generally, what my first question to a person when I meet them for the first time, no matter what it is, first question say, "Look, Aled, so thanks for inviting me. Look, what's your thoughts about all this at the moment? What's your thoughts?" A very open question, and just see what comes. And I'm just listening and building a relationship. I'm just having a conversation. So what I'm trying to get to is understand that person's communication aspects, how they relate to me, and how much they bring in the problem or the other party and so on. So I'm just searching for what I don't know. And so I do that in most of my cases. If there's lawyers involved, they'll often talk about various their side of the case. But in pre-mediation, I'm also interested in my relationship with the other lawyer and their relationship between each other. So I build that, and then I do that with the other side. And I find that helps me greatly to be able to hold that space, hold the energy right at the beginning when everyone's very nervous. And to me, that first 10, 20 minutes is probably the most important part of the mediation, is to get the setting right, where I'm sort of controlling the relationships and observing how they're working, having brought the two parties together with me in the room. So there's a triumvirate. So that's what I mean. And so that's how I see that being present and the preparation.
And from a practical perspective, the intake. I've got a bit of feedback here, actually. From the practical perspective, the intake, are those conducted on the day of the mediation, beforehand?
Beforehand, if I can, but practice-wise, oftentimes it's impossible. I fly into state and fly into a city. But what I do is I phone and try and engage the lawyers first on the phone, if they're lawyers, or the parties on the phone. And I do the same conversation. And generally I will try and meet, certainly in the sex abuse cases, the person who's the victim of the abuse, I will certainly meet them at least a week or so before the mediation. That's important. And if there's a bishop I haven't worked with before, I will do the same. And that's very important because that's highly charged. But in commercial matters, oftentimes many lawyers aren't experienced in mediation, and you might find that the same in England, is that they don't see the point in pre-mediation. It's time wasting. I'll give you the file, you can have a look at it. So it's often a battle to do that. So what I'll do is I'll try and talk to the lawyer and get him to have the client in the room, and I'll have a conversation by phone. But what I'll do is I'll start the mediation at, say, 11 o'clock instead of 10 in the morning, and I'll get there early, and I'll have a half an hour, 3/4 of an hour with each party before we start. So it's last minute, but even that is important. With difficult lawyers, it's often better to have them in the room causing problems than outside the room causing problems. And one of the interesting way I deal with difficult lawyers who say to me, "Greg, look, my client doesn't really need to see you. They're in the separate room there. Well, let's just start the mediation." My trick is I say, "Look, I'd just like to introduce myself and say hello." "Oh, okay." So as soon as they open the door, I'm in, shaking hands, and I'm sitting down and chatting to the party. So, "What's your thoughts, George? What's your thoughts on today?" And their lawyer has to come in and sit down, and I then... So I'm an irritant because I'm trying to irritate something into life. And oftentimes lawyers try to stop any irritation. They want to keep their client quiet, and they want to run the show. So there's often these battles going on, and the only way around it is building personal relationships. And it's very hard for recalcitrant lawyers to not want to shake a hand and have a bit of a chat. So there's a lot of game playing, but that's what I'm trying to do.
So you see a role as an irritant to irritate something into life, to discover the unknown.
It's because there's often parties in fixed positions settled into a very balanced conflict. One says black, one says white. And oftentimes they're the hardest ones to mediate. I prefer parties who are highly volatile. I've got something to work with. In fact, people who say to me, "Greg, this is a difficult mediation, you probably won't settle that," I'm happy because I know I've got something to work with. When they say, "Greg, this is very simple, this will take only 10 or 15 minutes," I know it's a death threat. I know it will never settle. It's like the curse put on me. So in a sense, what I'm doing is, and to do that, you have to really deal with your own issues. You cannot do it manipulatively. You have to deal with all those issues in your own self first. Get in a space of emptiness where you're actually honouring the parties by saying, look guys, I think you can settle this. So you create that energy through the relationship, and my view is you hold that energy for the period of the mediation. And it's like riding a surfboard down a wave. You just got to hold on, and be present. Don't try and think what's going to happen in the next turn. If you do that, you'll fall off. You've got to stay where you are. What am I doing? What's my next position?
When you say deal with your issues, are you talking about bias, unconscious bias, prejudice, baggage, fears? What sort of issues are you talking about, and what kind of work do you need to do as a mediator in order to deal with those issues?
Well, can I answer it in this context? Because when I started mediating, I just did a basic 3-day course, and it was a time in 1991 where there was a lot of mediation in the courts, and the courts were saying, look, Greg, you've done a mediation course, you come in and here's 4 mediations and just do it. So what I did is I just went in and I just did what I normally did. I ran through the model and I was just present. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years later, having had a lot of experience, that I was asked to teach it. And when I taught it, I found the traditional writings in mediation didn't quite accord with what I was doing. And so I was asked to actually find some theory to back what I was doing. And I was talking about this problem with a psychotherapist. And I was saying, look, I'm just present. And he said, Wilfred Bion, without memory, desire, and understanding. And I said, that's right. So it's what I was trying to do by being present is to overcome my memory, which is, all the things I know about divorced couples, all the things I've done, 50 or so sex abuse mediations. I've got to put that aside. All my desires, I have to be a great mediator, I've got to solve this problem. And my need to understand, which is the hardest one. I need to know what this is about. You have to overcome those. And what Bion said is that we all have those. They're natural. It's not about having them. It's about attaching them, being attached to them. So what you have to do is just deliberately detach from them. And it requires a bit of work, and it requires practice. And what Bion said, one of the writers on Bion said in the end, look, it's not something you just do before the mediation. It's a lifetime. And I think as a country solicitor in a country rural town, I had to be a social worker as well as a lawyer. And what I had to do is just be present, and I had to be balancing both sides of the fence. So I think I came to this profession with a natural dint towards that. So for me, it was an extension of that. And so what I'm doing is I'm just trying to be present, totally present, and just being aware of it. That's the most important thing. And if something comes in, don't be hard on yourself, just push it aside.
I mean, it reminds me a little bit of transcendental meditation. I did a TM course. Are you familiar with TM? I did a TM course a few years ago, and it was about when a thought comes into your mind and you're meditating. Don't try and get rid of it. Just say, almost like hello, kind of acknowledge it and let it sort of flutter away when in its own time. Not to sort of fight it or wrestle with it or then try and shut it away. Thoughts will come and thoughts will go, but not to be attached to those thoughts as they come in. And I can really relate to what you're saying around this kind of desire to understand. I've caught myself so many times in a mediation, wanting to be the sort of the rescuer in the situation, coming in on my big stallion. Don't worry, folks. Adelaide's arrived. I'll help you make sense of all of this, and it's just and as soon as it's interesting. The more experienced I've become, the more I recognise those thoughts that still come in, and I have a little bit of an inner smile. I think Aikido. In Aikido, they have this notion of an inner smile, not an outer smile. It's an inner smile of self-knowledge, self-awareness, it's kind of recognizing a moment, but not sort of letting it interfere or contaminate, everything or everyone else. So I can, and in fact, when I reflect on some of my mediations recently, admittedly, actually, since doing many of these interviews, I've been applying a lot of the lessons that I've learned, picked up, and I have noticed myself letting go of preoccupations, being more present, saying much less, being less attached to the outcome, and noticing much more productive conversations between the parties.
Yeah. I've often had people say to me, Greg, can I come and watch your mediations? Can I see how you do it? And certainly with the sex abuse ones, I can't because of the confidentiality and also the sensitiveness. But I've often thought if someone did come along and watch me, they'd say, you did nothing. I didn't. What did you do? And I would be hard to explain what I did.
Yeah.
But it's actually holding the space and very little words here and there and being present is what I'm doing. But outwardly, now you would see that I'm just sitting there. So
and it's
not a simplest game.
It's not necessarily what you say; it's what you don't say in those moments. When something happens, and you in the past you might have said something and intervened and ruined that momentum very subtly, and it's the difference between just that extra momentary pause or just that little nudge to help the conversation along, rather than sort of take over and summarize and just disrupt the flow of the conversation.
Yeah, it's the power of silence. Especially for lawyers, it's a very difficult concept for lawyers, but it is the most powerful thing we can do, silence.
Yeah.
But not just empty silence, but actually holding that space in the silence. And oftentimes, I think in a way there is many levels of conversation. One is what you hear, but I think we're all communicating subconsciously or unconsciously with each other. And it's through that emptiness that allows those to occur. An interesting example was in the sex abuse cases. A part of it is really holding that space in the beginning when the claimant comes in and meets the bishop for the first time. And the question I asked them, the open question is, look, George, what thoughts come to you at this stage? What's going in your mind? And I hold that space, and I make the bishop sit and listen. And I've told the bishop not to prepare anything. I want them to sit and listen while George speaks. And it's very important, that space, to hold that energy. And on occasions, I've found my mind wandering just to something, maybe, what am I going to have for dinner this afternoon or something? And suddenly everyone in the room stops, and whoever's speaking will say, I forgot what I was going to say. And I realise that I've left the room and the space is empty, and they've lost themselves. And that's when I've realised that we are communicating on many deeper levels that we don't know we're communicating on. And it's that holding that emptiness and that space, the container, as psychotherapists would talk. We become the container for them, and we provide a safe place for them to be, in a sense, unsafe. And that's the context when I mean the irritant. It's safe, but it's unsafe. It's that paradox. And we're balancing that. And we really have to deal with our own rubbish first. We cannot go in there if we're starting to add rubbish into the middle. And so, and it can be inadvertent rubbish. It can be just simply our ego, as you were saying. I need another notch on my scalp. Here. You guys aren't sorting this out. So, in a sense, I think we're doing a lot deeper stuff than we actually think we are.
I want to at some stage explore the implications on the notions of neutrality and impartiality with you in the context of, in light of what you've just talked about. Before we go there, because I'm sure you've got a few things to say about that, as I have, but that's for another time. Well, if we have some time, I want to, you've been involved, Greg, in mediating the effects of sexual and physical abuse in religious institutions, and I'll be really honest, I can't for a minute imagine what that would be like. I am curious to discover more, and I suppose I want to understand, what are the lessons that can be applied to mediating in other emotionally charged contexts, maybe not the ones that you've experienced. I mean, could you say a little bit more about the work that you've done and sort of processes and techniques, things that we can learn from that?
Well, fortunately in Australia, especially the Catholic Church, decided to deal with this problem fairly early in 1996, and they set up some processes to deal with it, and one was called Towards Healing. And I started working in that program in 2002. But basically what it is they've said, look, many of these cases are so historic, it's going to be very hard for the claimant to prove it in court because, the abuser in 1950 was in his 70s and they're well dead. All the heads of the orders are dead. The only one that's alive is now the 6-year-old or the 12-year-old child who's now 60. And of course, records weren't kept very well. Now, what they decided to do, the church could have just said, look, sue us, do your darndest, and we'll defend it. But they said, look, what we'll do is we'll look at the case, and if the person who's the abuser had form, and we can show you her at the school, and it sounds logical, and there've been other complaints, we will accept you for this process. And the process is really the church saying, look, on the balance of probabilities, not the criminal standard, but the civil standard, if we say on the balance of probabilities, we'll accept the case. And what we'll do is we'll give you an apology and we'll give you some sort of reparation. As a sort of ex gratia payment, it's in recognition that while we cannot prove whether we're legally liable or not, we really, in a sense, have a moral duty to help people. It's not necessarily admission of liability because the law is not clear on that. If the church didn't know about the abuser, they not. But if the church did know and moved them around, that's a different matter altogether. So there's the first thing about this process is there's no involvement with the perpetrator. So there's nothing to do. It's not restorative justice at all. It's really an acceptance by the bishop or the head of the order saying, look, we feel this has happened, we'll apologise and we'll offer you some money. So my role as the facilitator or the mediator is to first of all assess the parties. There's no point in going ahead with this if it's going to cause further trauma to the victim. So one of the most important is the intake. So the question I ask in the intake is I meet them. Oftentimes they've been prepared by the church over a professional standards body and they give them counselling. So when they come to me, they've already been assessed, they've already had some assistance with counselling, they've sort of helped along the way. So I get a bit of a report and they tell me how that person's travelling, how their family's travelling. So it's a really great service for me. So they then give me the name of the person, they give me all the file and they give me the name of the bishop. And then it's over to me and I run it like a pure mediation. I meet the complainant and I build that relationship. And the question I ask them is saying, well, look, let's just say we meet Bishop Smith next week and you have a mediation with him, you have a meeting, and it goes well. And 6 months down the track, things might be a bit different or better. Can you tell me what it might look like to move on forward? If they say, Greg, I can't really see it, but I just like X, Y, and Z, I know their mind is able to move to the future. But and some of them say to me, Greg, I cannot see the future, I feel like killing myself. So then you can't do it. They go back to counselling, and I won't go any further until I'm satisfied as best I can that what I'm going to do by meeting the bishop is not going to make things worse.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it's and what I say to them is I say a number of things. First of all, I say, look, you don't have to prove anything. They accept your story. But what I want the bishop to meet is the person behind the story. So I want you to be yourself. And the question I'm going to ask you, George, when we go in next Tuesday, the first question after my brief introduction, George, what thoughts come to you as we sit here today? And I try and engage George in a conversation. And I make the bishop sit and listen. And I've told them I don't want them to say anything until I turn to them. I don't want the bishop to prepare. I want them to trust that when they open their mouth, the right words will come out. So irritating the bishop, because a lot of them are older gentlemen and women, heads of orders, nuns, and they're more academic, they're thinking more intellectually. I'm trying to break down that intellectual. The victim is highly emotional, so I'm trying to draw them into a more situation where they can express their emotions, but also talk from the heart. And what I'm trying to do is join the two together, where we meet emotionally. So the other thing I say to the victim is this. It looks like you were abused when you were 12 years old. You're now 60 years old, okay? Now, George, you're sitting in front of me here, and you're talking like a 60-year-old. You're mature, you can understand what's going on, you're an intelligent 60-year-old, but there's that 12-year-old boy still there. And it's the 12-year-old boy that's going to meet the bishop. And I get them to start looking at themselves back at the 12-year-old boy. And sometimes I say, I hadn't thought about that. I say, look, that's okay. When we meet with the bishop next week, maybe I'll ask you at some stage, how's that 12-year-old boy going? And what it does is it draws the bishop to realise that this mature 60-year-old, there's a frozen 12-year-old boy who's frozen in time because of this horrific abuse, that we're actually dealing with this person. And if I can get the victim to look backwards and separate out from the 12-year-old, oftentimes what I'm trying to do is bring the 12-year-old boy to 2014 and connect. So that when they think of this abuse, not only do they think of 1960, they think of 2014. And hopefully if the bishop gives an apology and it works well, that overlays that traumatic event. And with good counselling, that I think is what I'm trying to do. So really what I'm trying to do is hold the space, bringing in the connection of human connection. And that's why if my mind wanders, everything freezes. And I've realised, I'm holding this space.
Okay, so firstly, you need to establish whether the victim of the abuse is in the right frame of mind to be able to go through this experience. If you've concluded they are, then part of the process of the intake is really getting them ready for that meeting with the bishop. I'm listening to you for the last sort of 5 or so 10 minutes. Literally, it's sort of jaw dropping. What kind of I can really appreciate how the importance of being present in those kinds of conversations. What kind of training do you need, Greg, to be able to be effective in those situations?
I think it's it comes back to us. I think the only training. Obviously you practice. My mediation skills have come in and they're fantastic. I'm drawing on them all the time. They form the basis of how I work. But that's not enough. It's about getting our minds in the right order. So first of all, you have to get rid of the concept that you're going to rescue people. Because if you're in a rescue mode, you're not there for them. You obviously, it's a risky thing because people are quite highly traumatised. But I think you have to deal with each moment as you come. And if you deal with one moment and it works, you then do the next moment. You've also got to be able to say when it has to end. So these mediations generally take 2 or 3 hours. They're not the first part where we do the apology will take between half an hour and 3/4 of an hour, maybe 1 hour. We then have a break, and we then start the second part, which is where to from here, in which we start negotiating over money. How much the bishop's going to offer. Now that's a whole new ball game, which can totally undo all the apology if the person doesn't get the huge amounts of money they want. So part of the role is then to manage that process. So it's a bit of a joyride. The first bit, you're dealing with emotions, and then you deal with the response that, well, if you really were sorry, you'd give me $1 million, So, but again, this is the part about it. This is a very, very difficult transition. But my view is that it's because it's difficult is where all the healing comes. And partly it's to do with boundary setting. Often when a child is abused, their boundaries are destroyed, and often they get into drugs, and so it's a loss of boundaries, and spiritual boundaries too, because oftentimes the perpetrators will select the holy boy, the kids that were going to be priests, brothers and nuns. They will not touch the naughty boys or girls. They will leave them. These are very clever, devious people who target the more spiritually inclined, and they will target them in mum and dad's house. They'll get invited back for dinner, and they'll take little Johnny for a picnic. And the parents will say, aren't we so blessed that Father Smith's taking our little Johnny for a picnic in the bush? We're so blessed. Aren't we blessed that Father Smith is going in and telling bedtime stories with the lights off, sitting on their beds, talking to them, and yeah? Aren't we so blessed? And these kids are highly traumatised. So you're dealing with very delicate situations. So I think, in a sense, we have to deal with our own stuff. That if any part of us is wanting to try and make things right, that can interfere with us being totally present for that exchange.
Mm. Okay. You've touched on the apology, but you said that you instruct the bishops or the religious leaders not to come prepared with an apology. Is that right?
Not to come prepared to say anything. No preparation. Read the file. They obviously read the file and know what the claim is and so on. But I say to them, I don't want you to do any preparation, and I want you to sit there. And I'm going to introduce George, and I tell them exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to introduce George, and the question I'm going to ask George is, what thoughts come to you as we speak? And I'll draw George out. And Bishop, when I sense it's right, I'll turn to you, and I'll say, Bishop, and you've now heard George. What thoughts come to you as you're sitting here? And what I'm doing is I'm watching the bishop out of my corner of my eye, and when they're squirming, and it's very hard not to feel emotion when you're hearing these from the heart stories. And oftentimes the wife is there talking about how she's had to deal with the husband over the years, and it's very emotional. And for some of the bishops who keep themselves very contained, it's very confronting. So I have to be careful with them, but I'm actually irritating them. So what I'll do is, if I feel they're quite discomforted, when I turn to them, I'll speak very slowly and give them time. And I'll say, Bishop, you've now heard George. What thoughts come to you? And I'm almost calming them down. And if they stutter and spurt, that's perfect. If they often say, I don't know what to say, and that's it, the connection's made. And that's what I need to start with. That's the first step of the apology. And oftentimes, it's suddenly two human beings speaking. And it's not the words that are said that's important at this stage, it's the emotion that's there. And so I let that draw out, and then what needs to happen next is the bishop has to then do a formal apology, and it's very important, and a lot of them get it wrong. At some stage, they have to then draw themselves up in their seat and say, look, George, as bishop of the Archdiocese of so-and-so, I want to say to you formally, this shouldn't have happened, and I want to apologise, and I say sorry. And what happens then is the victim invariably picks themselves up, and there's this magic thing happens. It's like a bolt, and oftentimes they'll start crying. It's like the word sorry is so powerful. That has to happen, but it can't happen without the first bit. But the other problem is often bishops find it difficult to say the word sorry. And I've had some of them say, George, you've heard what I've said, that you understand that that I understand you. Yeah, I understand. And so what I had to do is say, look, can we just have a short break? I go into the room and say, Bishop, can I say this to you? You have to say the word. I have to train them or educate them, say the word sorry. Even apologise is not as powerful, sorry. And they'll go in and bang the magic bullet. And that's often the catalyst that does the most, that gives it the basis of it being able to now move forward. And it gives that boundary, and the first step in the boundary. Because they now know that they didn't make it up in their head. All these years they've been burying it, not saying it. This actually really happened, because after many years, you start to think, did this happen? Did I dream this? And oftentimes there's a lack of validation for them. So that's their lesser boundaries. So we get that boundary with that. We then have the break, and then we start putting money around it. And of course, it's oftentimes what the bishop is offering is not correct, the right amount or whatever, and we have that. But then the second step comes. The complainant, whenever the figure on the table in the end, they say, look, you have to think about whether you accept this or not. And they've given time if they want more time. But if they say yes, if they're not happy, they've set the boundary around it. And it's something material in their hand they can take away and show that this has happened. And I think that is really the holistic thing of doing the apology and the payment of money at the same time. It's hard for the bishops. They don't like it. They find it difficult. But that, to me, is the hard bit that gives it the energy. And so at the time, I have to hold that space the whole way through. Mm. And it generally they take between 2 and 3 hours at the most. You don't want to have them all day. But it works because you do a lot of preparation and you get that space right. So that's a thumbnail sketch of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that the apology is seems quite sort of the formal apology, because it's as if you're making a distinction between two different types of apology. There's the sentiment, the acknowledgement, the squirming, the realization from the bishop, the reaction to what they're hearing, and then there's the formal apology, which follows a very specific format.
I suppose I'm being a bit descriptive there. Each bishop will do it differently, and most of them get it right. I suppose what I'm saying is that some of them don't quite understand it. Okay. That the power of the word sorry, and it's a powerful word, and it's some of them they're not used to it, and some of them are fantastic. Some of them are so terrible we actually get them out of the room, and sometimes the lawyer for the church will do the apology because the bishop's so bad, and we all just agree, look, he's just not up to it. You have to deal with what you got, and oftentimes they'll realise that it's often very generous, some of the people, but these are people who voluntarily come forward. But remember, people do this. So I'm dealing with a set group of people that want to move forward. So I've got the advantage of having people who voluntarily come, who after 40 or 50 years need to move forward. So I'm dealing with a good group. But I'm also dealing with a lot of people who are very angry and violent. So I have to be very careful there. People on drugs. And I've had to go into a few of these mediations thinking I should not be doing this, but no one else can do it. And, it's all the preparation in the world, and I've got lawyers there, I've got separate doors, I've got everything. But if I don't do it, no one else will do it. But all our training of power imbalances and violence and all this thing, I'm sorry, it is a risky sort of thing in some of the cases I've done, but I've got provisions in place and they generally seem to work. But touch wood, and you kind of know also we've got some royal commissions at the moment. You kind of know that they're very angry, and it's more likely than not they'll report you to the royal commission, or But you have to do it. You have to do it. Part of our duty as a mediator is to do no harm, and so that's a guiding principle. But it does challenge you quite a bit in some of the areas of work. One particular case, the guy had been thrown out of a psychiatrist's office because he threatened to bash him up. The lawyers who were acting for him, who had done a lot of this sort of work for complainants, said to me, Greg, no, it'll be okay, but he hasn't taken he's off heroin, but he hasn't got his drugs. He can't afford them at the moment, so he's not taking them at the moment. So I said, I'll take it one step at a time. I did the intake in their office, and he was one of those people who immediately, I was his best friend, Greg, you're going to save my world. And that's like a danger sign to me when that, because they can turn any minute. The other lawyers on the other side was a religious body that was not in existence anymore. So it was the insurance company. And I had a lot of time speaking to them, and they came along. We had separate rooms. We did have a short time together. And he was actually very good. We resolved it. he got some money. Then the question was, can he have the money because he might just go out and buy the drugs? So the lawyer had to work out to put it in a trust account to do that. So it worked very well. But this is a guy that you would probably say you should not go near for a mediation. So, but this was his only recourse to get some closure. So what do I do as a mediator? Do I say, sorry, I have to protect, or do I say, look, we have a duty, to have a go? So I was conscious of each step I was taking, and I was ready to stop at any stage, but it got there. But, don't try this at home.
Ken Cloke's book comes to mind, Mediating Dangerously. Have you read that?
I know that I saw his book many years ago, and I used it in some of my early teachings because that's how I felt I was always. Being in the moment is, in a sense, mediating dangerously because you don't know what's going to happen next. So you really have to have all your preparation in place. You have to be totally present and totally awake. And my feeling was that if you're totally thinking on the outcome and the things, you're not awake, you're not picking up the signs. And you have to pick the signs up if you're doing this sort of work. You just got to be totally aware. And that's why I came to the mediating in the moment is the sort of the focus.
Yeah, Greg, enlightening, absolutely. I mean, total admiration of you for that, doing that kind of work. That is amazing work. And I really appreciate you sharing that with the audience and myself. If we've got time, if you've still got time, I just want to touch upon this notion of neutrality. So on the basis that as a mediator, we have these sorts of preoccupations, we have these biases, we have this knowledge, and that can come into, we can bring that into the conversation, into the mediation. But also you mentioned a while ago that we are communicating subconsciously as well. We are interfering with the process, irritating the process subconsciously. How does all that sit with this espoused notion of neutrality or impartiality?
I think we have to look historically at the mediation development for this issue. We've sort of embraced impartiality and neutrality as a sort of a talisman to say to, especially the legal profession, we have value, we're neutral. Because the legal profession believes, I think if you look at some of the early writings on mindfulness, it was a response to the judges saying, well, look, you mediators really aren't kosher. We actually have justice and fairness because we actually decide things and we're impartial. And I think the early mediation response was, well, hey, we are impartial too. We're neutral. So I think it was sort of a defensive thing to sort of battle this concept that we were somehow not legitimate. And to me, it's a bit of a false trail because what it's led to is that we're selling thin air. We're selling nothing. We're selling a process, and we're not we're impartial. We're neutral bystanders, simply using this magic formula that we have, the 10 steps of mediation models and so on, and hocus pocus, and therefore we don't have. In a sense, I think we've devalued what we do. Now, that's the historical context. But I think in reality, I think that the concept that judges are impartial and neutral is as much bunkum as mediators are impartial and neutral. Having been an arbitrator where I had to make decisions, you're not impartial. I mean, you have to be fair, and your decisions have to be balanced. You have to give reasons. You write a judgment for the losing party. They have to know why they lost. You're under the threat of being appealed. But you bring your own interpretation to each fact that you're dealing with. So this concept of impartiality and neutrality is a myth. It doesn't exist. It's at most an aspiration. And I think going back to the purest of science, physics, they've given up on that concept of somehow taking the observer out of it. You cannot do it. So my view is that, one, there's no point being impartial and neutral if it doesn't exist. However, the fear of being partial and neutral is really just accepting the reality. But what it does mean then is if we accept that we are partial and not neutral, then it becomes totally important of what our partiality is and our non-neutrality is. Now, obviously, we're not a party to the proceedings. We don't have an interest in the outcome. And certainly the concept of being even balanced and so on is a great aspiration, but we cannot take away those thoughts that come into our heads. So my view is that if we then say, okay, let's just scrap the concept of impartiality and neutrality. Let's just say we're not. Let's accept that. Therefore, then ethics becomes number one. We have to be ethically behaving in our own thoughts and behaviours, and what mediators think matters. That's sort of the introduction of the paper, is how we think matters. And if we then come back to what I've been saying in the last hour or so, is that our thoughts do create energy across the room. Even our thought that this is a hopeless case will be imparted to the parties. Our thought that this, despite all in front of it, can settle, will be imparted to the parties. If we have a bias towards females or males or we want to rescue people, these have a basis, which means supervision is important, and we then have to look at our own debriefing and so on. Now, what I then say happens, we've got something to sell then. We then become, rather than a vague, mystical process, people will come to Adelaide and to me because of who we are, not that we're some independent party. So that's how I see it. So I think my view is that we should start recalibrating our whole thinking of mediation back to saying that let's just accept the reality, we are impartial. Let's now work from that. And then it becomes very important on how your thinking process is and how mine is, and that's what we sell.
So the implications are more around, well, not necessarily so. Thinking about if we can sort of address the issue of neutrality and impartiality, or take it off the table, then we become far more rigorous around our thinking, our sort of the ethical considerations for mediation. In fact, it could, our neutrality or our badge of neutrality and impartiality could be the barrier to the field really, evolving and taking off. That could be the one sort of thing that's holding us back.
Ironically, when you said take it off the table, I think it's already off the table. Because if you go to any conference, we talk about impartiality or neutrality, and that's the end of the thing. I mean, we talk about how we achieve that. Now, it can't be achieved because, it can't be. So it's actually a 5-minute job. But if we say we are partial and not neutral, then it becomes the major theme of the conference. We now say that instead of being just a passing little thing, this will become the mainstream.
Yeah.
And to me, it's actually promoting. It's actually naming the elephant in the room, and then we can't just simply say, "Oh, by the way, I'm impartial and neutral." Yes, I didn't interfere with that because, So it's the converse. It then becomes the major issue, and that is what we then need to sell as mediators. So the buyer, the market out there will say, because what the QC lawyers and retired judges are saying is, well, we're mediators, but we actually bring this wonderful wisdom of our law, which is totally partial. The judge reads the case overnight. The poor lawyer's prepared it for 3 years. The judge reads it overnight and forms a quick view and, makes this pronouncement. I'm a high court judge and, 20 years on the bench and, I was quizzed at this on the bus on the way in and I think this, totally. That's why they get the work, as opposed to us saying, we're just simple bystanders. I think if we own that we have something to sell, that our partiality and neutrality is actually the thing that's going to help you resolve the thing, then we then have a marketable thing that can deal with that.
And then it makes it easier to distinguish between which mediator you want to work with.
That's right. So it's in a funny way it will promote that.
Okay.
It's a challenge for the profession. I think we need to just start thinking differently.
We do. I like the idea of, rather than exploring neutrality and so on, let's just elevate the topic to promoting partiality.
Yeah. And what sort of partiality? Now, what I would say is that I do have partiality. I'm a white male from a certain background and a certain age. But what I'm going to say to the parties is that I'm going to be totally present for them. I'm going to try and put that aside. Now, it's going to be there. I'm not going to deny it's there. And if you catch me out on that, that's okay. But in my experience, I will work with you in the moment, and I'll work with you that. But I'm bringing an expertise, and that is my expertise. My expertise is being able to allow my experience and partiality in my background to be there, but to not influence the thing.
Okay.
So in a funny way, by acknowledging it, I'm actually creating the thing we're trying to achieve. Whereas if I just simply say, "Hey, I might be a white middle class male, I'm impartial and neutral, and I'll deal with the I think we've got to own our own stuff."
Owning our own stuff. I liked actually the clarification at the end. So it's not necessarily promoting our partiality. What we're doing is acknowledging that it's there, and the real skill that we're bringing is we're acknowledging it's there, but we're not going to let it interfere with. We're going to try our hardest not to let it interfere with, and negatively interfere with the conversation that's going on. It may do, and if it does, you need to let me know, or I might have that clarity myself.
It's on the table, it's out there, rather than simply saying, "Hey, we're mediator equals impartial, neutral," there you go, end of story.
Very, very interesting. Greg, how do I find out more about mediating in the moment?
Well, I think I suggest that the paper titled "Moving the Focus from Mediating the Moment to Mediating the Moment to Mediating the Problem," I think that's a start. I think there's some quotes in there, and I think if you look at the concept of being evenly suspended attention and not trying to understand everything, and start the practice, and you still, it's an ironic thing. You still need to prepare for your mediation, but I think the Ogden concept of overcoming that preparation is the important thing. Let it go. One of the things we do in the workshop we run in Tuscany is another quote from Ogden is that we try and spend the 5 days trying to go into these deeper things of our intuition and understanding impartiality and neutrality and how it actually means. But one of the problems is that to do that, we start this intellectual process, which immediately takes us out of the moment. So one of the challenges for us to do is to de-intellectualize everything. So it's a paradox. You kind of got to know something to unknow it. And I think the way that Ogden puts it is that people who know something teach people who want to know what it is not to know. So what I would say to mediators out there is, of course, read all your books, read the articles, but in a sense, let them go. Overcome them. Don't attach to them. Don't attach to any philosophy. I hear people saying, "I'm a transformative mediator," or "I'm not a transformative mediator." It's like, get the essence of transformation, but let it go. Get the essence of whatever you're doing and let it go. Overcome it and be present. And watch what comes in and just practice it. And just practice it in your ordinary life. Don't try to understand too much. Just look for what you don't know rather than what you do know. And just try it. And sit there, and if something is puzzling you, it's very important. Sit with it. Don't rush to a conclusion. Be comfortable with uncertainty. And I think that's what the profession is. I think the basis of mediation is the ability to be comfortable with not knowing what's going on. You don't know what's happening. You don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know where this is going to go, but that's okay. You can live with it, So if you adopt that attitude, suddenly you calm down and everyone else calms down. So again, it's all about us. Let go. I'll probably finish with this comment that when I was teaching at university, and I teaching in dispute system design, and as a lecturer, we have to set exams and mark them not exams, but assignments. And I thought it'd be very smart. And I thought I'd say, okay, guys, I want you to write the assignment question and to answer it. And they said, okay. And I thought, what a clever thing. And one of the women who was very clever wrote, the question was, there is no evidence that life should be taken seriously. That was her question. She proceeded to answer it in dispute system design and project alliancing. And I think when I think of what is my main game, what is the main irritation that I bring to mediation, and that is that there is no evidence that life should be taken seriously. You guys, look, we're going to die one day. Where do we go? We were born. What happened in 1930? I wasn't alive. How do you explain this whole world? We're here for. How can you take this whole thing seriously? And I think that's the irritation we do. And I mean, you have to do it with ethics. But really, what I'm saying, guys, come on, tell me something, And even with the most sex abuse cases, what I'm saying to them is, guys, this can help you move forward. It's great that you've come forward and meeting the bishop, and it's important that they hear you. For too long, it's been kept quiet. Now, this is difficult, but I believe that this is going to help you reform your boundary. I trust this will happen. And of course, if it becomes dangerous, I'll stop it. But I'm always believing that even in the worst case, even that one I described, which I shouldn't have taken, I have a belief that this guy, no matter all his problems, he was generally abused. There's no doubt about that. He suffered greatly. And of course, he's self-destructed. Should I then say, sorry, mate, you don't fit my tick box thing? I have to trust that I believe that you can do it. And I think I'm speaking to him at a deeper level, and he will pick that up. But if I think, oh, you rat bag, you deserve everything you got, he will know it straight away, and you'll probably cause a problem. So in a sense, I think that's what the core thing of what I'm trying to say is the irritant is, come on, we can do this, And I have to believe it, even though there are things around me that make me worried, but Yeah.
Greg, I mean, I'm going to take a lot away from this interview. Look for what you don't know. Really, just so simple, but just such a helpful mantra. Almost like a little meditative mantra to take into a mediation. Don't look for what I know. Look for what I don't know. And there is no evidence that life should be taken seriously. That's going straight up on my whiteboard in front of me here. Greg, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and all the very best. I'll put your contact details below the interview, because you're also running an annual retreat in Tuscany each year. Is that right?
That's right. It's a 5-day workshop with myself, Barbara Wilson from the UK, and Margaret Ross from Adelaide. And we have about 15 to 20 very experienced mediators. And we just spend the 5 days trying to explore these deeper issues. I think it's really hopefully building a body of people who are starting to bring the profession into a deeper level, because I think we need to move beyond the simple tips and tricks that so dominate a lot of what we talk about. But I'm happy that anyone wants to email me. I'm happy to have a chat, because I think these are very important issues, and I have great respect to all you people out there who actually go into the coalface each day and deal with these difficult things and have to work each moment to moment. And I put my hand out to you and wish you all well. And if through exchanges we can help each other, that would make me greatly happy.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for all the work you do.
Great. Appreciate that. Cheers.